can't sit here," she told the maid. Then the billionaire did something no one expected. "Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I need you to hear this." There was a woman, tired, broken, carrying a sleeping 3-year-old on her shoulder, who walked into a room full of rich people and sat down on the only empty chair she could find. And someone looked at her, really looked at her, with cold, disgusted eyes, and said 4 words that cut like glass. "You can't sit here." Now what happened next? Nobody in that room expected. Not the guests, not the security guards, not even the woman herself. Because the most powerful man in that building, a man worth billions, stood up. And what he did changed every single life in that room forever. This is not just a story about kindness. This is a story about secrets, sacrifice, and a truth that had been buried for 29 years. Stay with me. You need to hear every word. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're here today because this story, it's one of those that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. Before we begin, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? I read every single one, and I love knowing who's out here with me. And if you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit that subscribe button. Stories like this drop every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single one. Alright, let's go. She didn't ask for much. She never did. Jemima woke up every morning at 4:47 a.m., not because her alarm told her to, but because her body had learned long ago that rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. The apartment she lived in was on the 4th floor of a crumbling building on the edge of the city, where the elevator hadn't worked in 3 years and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing about money every single night. She knew those arguments well. She'd had them with herself many times, sitting at her kitchen table at midnight, staring at bills she couldn't pay, doing math that never added up. But every morning before she let the weight of all of it crush her, she would walk to the small corner of the room where little Sarah slept, 3 years old, with her mother's dark lashes and her father's smile that Jemima tried very hard not to think about anymore, and she would just watch her breathe. That tiny chest rising and falling. That little fist curled under her chin. And Jemima would feel something shift in her chest. Something that wasn't hope exactly. Hope felt too fragile, too dangerous, but something like reason. A reason to lace up her worn shoes and go. She worked as a cleaning maid at the Harlow Grand, one of the most prestigious event venues in the city. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, a guest list that read like a magazine cover. Jemima moved through it like a ghost, invisible in her gray uniform, mop in hand, eyes down. She had learned that was the safest way to exist in places like this, to take up as little space as possible, to be seen only when something needed cleaning. That particular Saturday was different, though. It was the annual Harlow Charity Gala, a black tie event where the city's wealthiest gathered to write checks that would ease their conscience and pose for photographs that would end up in glossy publications. Jemima wasn't supposed to be there during the event. Her shift ended at 5. She was supposed to finish the East Corridor, sign out and go home. But Sarah had a fever the night before. A bad one, the kind that had Jemima up every 2 hours, pressing a damp cloth to her daughter's forehead, whispering prayers she hadn't said since childhood. By morning the fever broke, but Jemima had missed her bus, scrambled to drop Sarah at her neighbor Mrs. Patel's, and arrived 40 minutes late. Her supervisor, a rigid woman named Donna, had cut her break in half as punishment. No lunch, half a cup of cold coffee, and standing orders to finish 3 extra rooms before sign-out. By 7 in the evening, Jemima's feet were screaming. Her back was a quiet fire. She had eaten nothing since the crust of toast she'd shared with Sarah that morning. And then, without warning, Mrs. Patel called. Sarah was crying. Wouldn't stop. Wanted her mother. Jemima's heart did what it always did. It chose Sarah first. She finished mopping the last corridor in record time, clocked out, and rushed to collect her daughter. By the time she arrived back at the venue's side entrance, the one staff used, Sarah had cried herself into exhaustion and fallen asleep in Jemima's arms, her small head heavy on her mother's shoulder. The bus home didn't come for another 40 minutes. Jemima stood at the side entrance, Sarah deadweight in her arms, legs trembling. She couldn't stand for 40 minutes. Not like this. She looked around and saw, through the half-open door to the event lobby, a row of chairs near the far wall. Guest chairs, yes. Expensive ones, yes. But they were empty. The gala was in the main hall. Nobody was here. She told herself it would be 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes off her feet. She walked in quietly, sat down in the very last chair in the row, shifted Sarah gently so she wouldn't wake, and exhaled, long and slow, for the first time all day. She closed her eyes for just a moment. And that was when she heard the heels. Precise. The kind of heels that had never known a broken elevator. Have you ever been so tired that even a chair felt like it could save you? Have you ever had to fight for just 5 minutes of rest? The heels belonged to Aaliyah, 34 years old, polished in the way that only comes from years of deliberate effort, or from never having to try at all. She wore a deep burgundy gown that probably cost more than Jemima made in 4 months, and her dark hair was swept up in a style that looked effortless but had taken 90 minutes and a personal stylist. Aaliyah was the fiancée of Michael Harlow. The Michael Harlow, 40 years old, CEO of Harlow Enterprises. The man whose name was on the building, on the gala program, on the charitable foundation plaques that lined the lobby walls. He was, by every measure the world cared about, extraordinary. Forbes had called him the most quietly powerful man in the country. His employees called him focused, fair, occasionally terrifying in his expectations. His friends, the few genuine ones, called him something rarer, decent. But Aaliyah was not thinking about Michael right now. She had slipped out of the main hall because her smile was getting tired and her champagne glass was empty and she needed 60 seconds of quiet before she went back in to be on again. She walked into the lobby, and she saw Jemima, gray uniform, worn shoes with a small split near the left toe, a sleeping toddler bundled against her chest, sitting, in one of the guest chairs as though she had every right to be there. Aaliyah stopped walking. Something moved across her face. Not cruelty exactly, more like offense. Like the sight of this woman in this space was a disruption to an order that was supposed to be maintained. She walked forward, stood in front of Jemima. Jemima heard the footsteps stop and opened her eyes. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Aaliyah said it, quietly, precisely, with a kind of calm that is somehow worse than shouting. "You can't sit here." 3 seconds of silence. Jemima looked at her. The gown. The perfect hair. At the expression that didn't even bother to be unkind. It was just dismissive. Like Jemima was furniture that had been placed incorrectly. She looked down at Sarah, still sleeping, lips slightly parted, one tiny hand gripping the collar of her mother's uniform. And then she looked back up at Aaliyah. "I know," Jemima said. Her voice was quiet. Not defeated, just quiet, the way people are quiet when they have learned to absorb pain without showing the wound. "I'll be gone in a few minutes. My daughter was." "I don't need an explanation," Aaliyah said. "These chairs are for guests. Your staff. There's a staff room downstairs." "The staff room is locked after 7, Jemima said. "Then you wait outside." Just like that. Jemima stood up carefully, adjusting Sarah's weight. Her legs ached. Her eyes stung, not from tears she was going to cry, but from the effort of not crying. She had done this before. She knew how to fold herself smaller, how to disappear, how to take something sharp to the chest and walk away still breathing. She was almost to the door when she heard a voice from across the lobby. "Whoa. But the kind of calm that fills a room. "Aaliyah." Both women turned. Michael Harlow was standing at the entrance to the main hall. He had clearly just stepped out. His bow tie was slightly loosened, the only concession he ever made to formality. He was looking at the scene in the lobby with an expression that was very difficult to read. "What's happening here?" he said. Aaliyah turned to him with a small smile, the reassuring kind. "Nothing, darling. Just sorting out a little." "I heard," he said. The smile on Aaliyah's face didn't disappear, but it changed. And Michael Harlow looked at Jemima, really looked at her, for one long, strange moment. Something moved across his face. Something nobody in that lobby could quite name. If you were Jemima in that moment, what would you be feeling? And if you were Michael, what would you do next? Michael walked across the lobby. Not toward Aaliyah. Toward Jemima. She stood very still, Sarah heavy in her arms, certain that she was about to be escorted out by the most important man in the building, that this night was going to become one of those stories she would tell herself in the dark as a reminder to never sit down somewhere she wasn't supposed to. But Michael didn't stop in front of her the way Aaliyah had, standing over, looking down. He stopped at her level, adjusted slightly, the way tall people do when they want to make themselves less imposing. And then he looked at Sarah, just for a second. And something happened in his face that Jemima had no category for. It wasn't pity. It wasn't the soft performance of kindness expression that wealthy people sometimes wore at charity events. It was something else, something interior, like a door had opened somewhere deep in him and a draft had come through that he wasn't prepared for. He looked back up at Jemima. "What's her name?" he said. Jemima blinked. "Excuse me. Your daughter. What's her name?" "Sarah," she said, carefully. He nodded slowly, like the name meant something. "How old is she?" "3. Another nod. Then, with no fanfare, no announcement, Michael simply walked to the row of guest chairs, picked up 2 of them, and carried them toward a small alcove near the window, away from the main traffic of the lobby, more sheltered. He set them down, straightened up, and looked at Jemima. "Sit here," he said. "It's quieter. She won't be disturbed." The lobby went very still. The 2 young members of the event staff who had appeared at the edge of the room exchanged a look. Aaliyah had not moved. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were doing something complicated. Jemima didn't move either. "Sir, I'm staff. I wasn't supposed to." "You're a mother whose child is sleeping," Michael said simply. "Sit down. I'll have someone bring you water and something to eat." And then, before she could respond, before Aaliyah could say anything, he turned and looked at his fiancée. It was a very brief look, very quiet, but Aaliyah said nothing. Jemima sat down. She sat down in the chair Michael Harlow had carried to the alcove, settled Sarah against her shoulder, and felt something happen in her chest that she couldn't explain. Something that broke just slightly at the edges, not in a bad way, but in the way things break when they've been held together under tremendous pressure for a very long time. A young staff member appeared within minutes with a glass of water and a small plate of food from the gala kitchen. Jemima ate, quietly, in the alcove, while a charity gala for the city's wealthiest people continued 20 meters away. And Michael Harlow went back into the main hall. But twice, in the next hour, Jemima looked up and found him standing at the entrance to the hall, looking in her direction. Not staring. Not in any way that felt threatening. Just looking. Like he was trying to remember something he had been trying very hard to forget. She didn't know why. She didn't know that in approximately 6 days, that question would rearrange her entire life. Have you ever had a stranger look at you as if they knew something about you that you didn't know yourself? What does that feel like? Here is where the story fractures open. Because there is something about Jemima that we haven't told you yet. Something she herself has carried for 29 years without knowing what it meant. Her mother, a woman she barely remembered, who had died when Jemima was 4, had left her exactly 2 things. A small silver locket with no photograph inside and a name. Not Jemima's name. Different name. A name her mother had whispered to her the night before she passed, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and old flowers. The name was Harlow. She had never looked it up. That might seem strange. That might seem like the first thing a person would do. Type a name into a search bar, follow the thread, find the truth. But Jemima had learned early that some threads, when pulled, unravel more than you're ready to carry. She had been passed between 3 foster families by the time she was 8. She had taught herself that attachment, to names, to histories, to the idea of belonging somewhere, was a fast road to a very specific kind of pain. So she had kept the locket. She had kept the name. She had folded it away somewhere small and private inside herself. And she had lived her life forward. She had a daughter now. She had Sarah. That was enough. Except the Monday after the gala, Jemima arrived at work to find a sealed envelope at the staff check-in desk with her name on it. Inside was a card. Simple, no letterhead, with a mobile number and 6 words written in clean, deliberate handwriting. I'd like to speak with you, MH. She stood in the break room holding the card for a long time. The logical part of her said, "This is nothing." He's a wealthy man who felt generous that night. He wants to offer you a better job or a larger tip or some charitable gesture that will make him feel good and leave you exactly where you are. But there was another part of her, quieter, older, the part that had carried a silver locket for 29 years, that said something else entirely. She called the number. He answered on the second ring. "Thank you for calling," he said. No greeting, no performance. Just that. "Your card didn't leave me many options," she said, and then immediately felt the boldness of it, the slight edge that had slipped out from somewhere she usually kept it locked. There was a pause. And then she heard him smile. She couldn't see it, but she heard it. "No," he said. "I suppose it didn't. Can you meet me? Not here at the venue. Somewhere neutral. There's a cafe on Brennan Street. Do you know it?" "I do," she said. "Thursday. Liam. I'll explain everything then." "Everything," she repeated. "That's a large promise." "I know," he said. "I don't make it lightly." She went. Thursday morning, Sarah was at Mrs. Patel's, and Jemima walked into the cafe on Brennan Street in her best jacket, the navy one she kept for job interviews, and found Michael Harlow already there. No entourage, no assistant. Just him at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee already waiting. He stood when she entered. She noticed that. She didn't know why she noticed it, but she did. She sat down. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. She looked at him. "All right," she said. "Everything." He was quiet for a moment. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times and found, now that the moment had arrived, that none of the rehearsed versions were adequate. "My father," he began slowly, "was not a good man." She waited. "He was brilliant. He built this company from almost nothing. He gave a great deal of money to causes that looked impressive in the newspaper. But privately," Michael paused, turned his coffee cup slightly. "Privately, he was the kind of man who believed that certain people existed to serve him, and that the consequences of his choices were other people's problems to absorb." Still she waited. 29 years ago, Michael said. He had an affair with a woman who worked in his house. A young woman. When she became pregnant, he gave her money. A significant amount. And he made her sign something. And she disappeared. Cafe was warm. The morning light came through the window in long pale bars. Somewhere behind Jemima, someone ordered a pastry and laughed at something their companion said. Jemima's hands were very still around the coffee cup. "The woman's name," Michael said quietly, "was Rania. And I spent the last 6 months trying to find out what happened to her. What happened to the child she had." He looked at her. "I found a locket," he said, "in my father's things after he died last year. A silver locket, with nothing inside, and a name written on the back." Jemima's breath stopped. "What name?" she whispered. "Jemima," he said. "What would you do if someone sat down across from you and began dismantling everything you thought you knew about where you came from? Could you stay in that chair? She didn't cry. People always cry in these moments in films. They reach across the table, they collapse, they make sounds that let everyone around them know that something profound is happening. Jemima did not cry. She sat very straight in her navy jacket, and she looked at Michael Harlow, and she said, in a voice so steady it surprised even her, "Say that again." And he did. He told her everything. Slowly, methodically. The way someone speaks when they have been sitting with information long enough to understand the weight of every word. His father, Edmund Harlow. Rania, the woman who had worked in the household, young and quiet and clever, who had trusted the wrong person entirely. The money Edmund had paid to make the situation disappear. The document she had signed, relinquishing any claim. The child, who had been born and then effectively erased from the Harlow story. He had found the locket in a locked box in his father's study. And inside the box, beneath the locket, was a photograph, faded, small, of a woman holding an infant. On the back of the photograph, in his father's handwriting, were 2 words. My mistake. Michael had spent 6 months and significant resources tracing that thread. A social worker's record. Hospital file. A chain of foster placements. A name that had been changed and changed and changed again by administrative accident and institutional carelessness, until it landed, finally, as Jemima, 29 years old, cleaning the marble floors of the building that had been built on her own bloodline's money. Jemima sat with that for a very long time. Then she said, "How do you know it's me? Not just another child. Another story that fits." Michael reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed something on the table between them. Photograph. Faded. Jemima looked at it. And the woman in the photograph, holding a newborn, looking at the camera with exhausted, frightened, fiercely loving eyes, had Jemima's cheekbones, Jemima's brow, Jemima's particular way of holding her chin slightly up, as though bracing for something. Jemima looked at her mother's face for the first time she could remember. The cafe continued around her. Plates clinked. Someone laughed. Morning light moved across the table. And Jemima, very quietly, with enormous dignity, began to cry. Not the collapsing kind. The silent kind. The kind that happens in people who have learned to contain themselves completely, where the tears come without any assistance from the rest of the face, as though they have found the one small exit in an otherwise sealed room. Michael did not look away. He did not offer a tissue or a platitude. He simply sat with her in it, in the way that people sit with each other when words would be smaller than the moment. After a long time, Jemima wiped her face carefully with the back of her hand. "What do you want from me?" she said. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have a right to know," he said. "And because my father's estate, the portion that legally belonged to that agreement, which was signed under coercion, which no court would uphold today, belongs to you." She stared at him. "I'm not doing this out of charity," he said, and there was something almost sharp in it. A firmness, as though he'd anticipated being misunderstood. "I'm not offering you a gift. I'm telling you that money was taken from your mother, from you, by my father's deliberate choice. I'm telling you it should be returned." "And Aaliyah," Jemima said. The question sat on the table between them. Michael was quiet for a moment. "Aaliyah and I," he said carefully, "have some conversations to have." Jemima looked at him for a long time. "You know what the strange thing is," she said quietly. "The night at the gala, when you looked at me, I thought I was imagining it. That look. You weren't," he said. "You recognized something. Not consciously." He turned the coffee cup again. That small gesture she was beginning to understand, that he made when he was navigating something difficult. "But something in me, yes. Something new." She nodded slowly. Then she picked up the photograph from the table. She held it in both hands. She looked at her mother's face. "She called me Jemima," she said softly. "Even in the system they kept it. Every family, Every file. They changed everything else but somehow always kept that. She fought to keep it, Michael said. I found that in the records too. She specifically requested, she was very insistent, that whatever happened, the child keep the name. Jemima closed her eyes. Her mother, a woman she had 4 memories of, none of them certain, had loved her hard enough to fight for one small thing. Name. The thread. The way back. Sarah, she thought suddenly. Her daughter, 3 years old, with her father's smile and her grandmother's cheekbones and a whole history she didn't know she was carrying. When did you last think about the people who fought for you silently? The ones who left you something small that turned out to mean everything. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, the city continued its business. The Harlow Gala was written up in 2 magazines and a lifestyle blog. Michael Harlow attended 4 meetings, signed 12 documents, and had the conversation with Aaliyah that he had told Jemima they needed to have. We don't have recordings of that conversation. But we know how it ended, because Aaliyah's engagement ring was back in its box by the following Friday. And we know that Aaliyah, to her credit, said one thing before she left that she had not expected to say. I should not have spoken to her the way I did. She said it without an audience. Without the opportunity for it to make her look good. Just said it to Michael quietly because it was true. That matters. Because this story is not about villains. It's about the choices people make when they've been shaped by worlds that taught them some people matter more than others. And the harder, braver choice of deciding to be shaped differently. What Michael Harlow did next. This is the part nobody expected. Not the lawyers. Not his board. Not the city. He didn't quietly transfer money into an account and file it away as resolved. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't make Jemima a figurehead charity project. He called her on a Tuesday morning and said, I'd like to offer you a position on the Harlow Foundation board. Not as a token. Not as a symbol. Because you grew up moving through a system that failed people, and we spend millions trying to fix that system, and we have never once had someone in the room who actually lived it. I need someone who knows what a broken elevator feels like. Who knows what it means to do math at midnight that doesn't add up. Silence on the line. Then Jemima said, I don't have a degree. I know, he said. I have 12 people with degrees. I need one person with a different kind of knowledge. Another silence. Sarah comes with me to meetings sometimes, she said. I don't always have. There's a childcare facility in the building, he said. 3rd floor. Mrs. Anwar runs it. She makes excellent biscuits. Sarah will be fine. And Jemima laughed. For the first time she genuinely could not remember how long she laughed. Not the polite kind. Not the tired kind. The real kind that starts somewhere in your actual chest. All right, she said. All right. All right, Mr. Harlow. Michael, he said. I think we might be family, technically speaking. Half, she said. Half, he agreed. But that is still not the final twist. The final twist happened 6 months later. Jemima was leaving the Harlow Foundation offices on a Thursday evening. Sarah on her hip, a tote bag over her shoulder, the small silver locket around her neck, when she stopped at the building entrance. There was a woman standing at the door. Older. 60 perhaps. A face that had been beautiful in the precise way that Jemima's face was beautiful. Same angle of the cheekbone, same careful way of holding the chin. The woman looked at Jemima. And the color drained entirely from her face. Jemima, the woman said. Not a question. Jemima went very still. I'm Nadia, the woman said. Her voice was barely there. I was Rania's sister. Your mother's sister. I've been looking for you since. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. Started again. I hired someone. Few months ago. When I saw Michael Harlow mentioned in the news in connection with a charitable review. I thought maybe. She couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah, 3 years old, sitting on her mother's hip, looked at this stranger with absolute calm and said, "The way toddlers say things, with devastating unconcern for the magnitude of what they're saying. Who dat?" And Jemima looked at the woman who had her mother's face. And then Jemima, who had been alone for 29 years in the particular way that people are alone when they have no one who remembers where they came from, took one step forward. And then another. And when Nadia opened her arms, Jemima walked into them, Sarah still on her hip, locket pressing warm against her collarbone, and held on. Not the way she held on to things she was afraid of losing. The way you hold on when you've finally found something that was always supposed to be yours. The last chair she had ever sat in uninvited. And look what it had led her home to. There is a version of this story where Jemima walks out of that lobby and nothing changes. Where no one notices. Where the small cruelty of "you can't sit here" joins the 10,000 other small cruelties she has absorbed and disappears without a trace. But someone noticed. And that is the thing this story is really about. Not money. Not grand gestures. Not billionaires and secrets and inheritance. It's about the choice to notice. To look at a tired woman in a gray uniform holding a sleeping child and see a human being who deserves a chair. It's about the door that one act of human decency can open. Not just for the person receiving it, but for the person offering it. For the truth waiting on the other side. You don't have to be a billionaire to change a life. You just have to decide that the person in front of you, whoever they are, whatever they're wearing, matters. So here is the question I want to leave with you today. Who in your life might be sitting in the wrong chair? Overlooked, exhausted, carrying more than you know. And what would happen if you simply said to them, "Sit here. You belong here. See you." If this story moves something in you, hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it tells me that stories like this are worth telling. Drop a comment and tell me, what part hit you the hardest? Was it Jemima? Sarah? The moment with the photograph? I want to know. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week, we bring you stories that remind you what it means to be human. Real, flawed, and capable of extraordinary things. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who feels invisible. Someone who needs to be reminded that a single moment, one small act of being seen, can change everything. I'll see you in the next story. And until then, be the person who notices.